Please welcome to the stage Twitter Sales Director, Dara Nasser.
Welcome everyone. Wow, this place is massive. Thank you so much for joining us today at Twitter Stories. It's fantastic to have you here. The hashtag is Twitter Stories. Feel free to tweet along with it. At the moment, the popcorn is getting a lot of noise on Twitter. So please do tweet along. The author Philip Pullman once said that after shelter, nourishment, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. And I absolutely love that quote. Not just because it tells you how important stories are, but fascinatingly, and the reason we're here today, are the new ways that we're seeing stories be told. Now, when I was a kid, or even in my 20s, stories would break in papers or on the TV. If you cast your mind back 10 years, the biggest story of the day were the 7/7 bombings that you saw break on TV and shown throughout the day. And that's typical, right? You'd see global and national stories being prioritised and distilled into 30-minute TV programmes and shown. But what about the more local stories? Well, they'd be just that, local. Perhaps making it into the Romford Recorder, or maybe, sometimes beyond. But really, they were really just seen as those big breaking stories. Even the advent of the internet didn't change this initially. There are a multitude of websites with millions upon millions of stories in them. However, unless you knew what you were looking for or they're mainstream enough, you weren't going to be reached by them. But the real catalyst of change is the mobile device. And what we're seeing now is that internet access on the mobile is outstripping that on the desktop and the laptop. And that's driving this. The power of the data and the information that's accessible to everyone, everywhere, at the same time, all the time. So stories now can hit an audience of millions in an instant. But maybe more importantly, there are more stories, more voices being heard by more people. And that's what we're going to see today. When Jack Dorsey founded our company 9 years ago, in fact, it was the birthday this past weekend, I'm not sure he knew how significant Twitter would be in the spreading of these stories. And I don't just mean huge news events, but hearing voices or bringing voices to the fore that you would never have done previously. And it's changing society as well, behaviour in society. The Washington Post journalist Wesley Lowery recently delivered a TED Talk a couple of weeks ago, and he focused on the Ferguson unrest, when black teenager Michael Brown was shot dead by a white police officer. And Wesley remarked, that in days gone by, these events would be attended by journalists all huddling together, taking photos, taking notes, comparing opinions. But now he saw journalists and bystanders shoulder to shoulder. They're all taking notes, they're all taking photos. And these bystanders are publishing their story on social media, and specifically in this case, Twitter. People are creating the story rather than being mere characters within it. But today, just to make it clear, we don't want to talk about the academic power of storytelling, rather the impact the stories can have and how, say, an individual tweet can become global in an instant. We want to take time to celebrate Twitter's role in stories. So we've invited people, organisations, brands that have their own stories about how Twitter has changed their lives or the way they work. We want you to hear it from them directly and not us. Our key takeaway we want you guys to have is not only to understand the impact of these stories and how quick they scale, but how frequently they occur. And it's remarkable. Some things you'll hear about today would happen once a decade. Now you're seeing them every day, which is astonishing. And we also want you to go away thinking how you or your brands can play your own part in creating these stories or being part of someone else's. We're thrilled to invite a range of speakers today, some comedians, advertisers, social movements, and of course the obligatory shepherd. They're going to be all talking to you today, but also we've got a secret up our sleeves, something brand new. We're going to show you something today that no one else in the world has seen. How to take your stories to the next level. The content's going to be over by 6, I promise. And then afterwards, we'd love if you stayed for some drinks, food, and there might be a special guest star. But enough from me. I want you to hand you over now to Andy Nairn, founding partner of Lucky Generals, who's going to tell you his very own story. Thank you.
Hello. I've just seen that Zayn is officially leaving One Direction. So, yeah, conscious that I might not be the most interesting Twitter-related story right now, but if you want to leave, feel free. Otherwise, stick around here. An unlikely story about a very badly behaved bookmaking company, Paddy Power, hooking up and getting into bed with a very well-behaved and respected charity, Stonewall. So if that doesn't prove the amazing ability of Twitter to bring different communities together, I don't know what does. I'm going to cheat it a little bit, because in the interest of time, I'm going to play you a little video, first of all, that'll give you the whole story from start to finish. And then I'm going to just pick out a couple of the things that I think made this campaign a bit of a success. So I'm going to try the video here. First technical failure of the day. Let's have a look.
At this game, fans openly chant homophobic abuse against rival supporters.
Chant started saying, "You're from a town full of gays, and I hope you all die of AIDS."
Can't change that. I look like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle.
But together we can change the game. Players are lacing up to kick homophobia out of football. Use hashtag Rainbow Laces to get involved and show your support.
Cowabunga! So there you go. So, yeah, what I thought I'd do, rather than give you the whole usual spiel that I'm sure you've heard a million times of what makes great stories, I thought I'd just pick out a couple of the different ingredients. And because it turns out, actually, it's just what makes a great story on Twitter is just what makes a great story sort of generally. Starting with some great characters. So this whole thing started when we just launched the agency. This was our very first client, and it was and Paddy Power came along, which we were delighted by because they're just the most amazing brand, got a great sense of personality and their own character. You know, they really get tone of voice, and they really get how to use that tone of voice on social media. So, sort of parking this campaign, my favourite ever tweet, which was nothing to do with us, was an in-house tweet from Paddy Power directed at Ladbrokes. Some of you might remember this, and all it said was, to their arch rivals, Ladbrokes said, "At Ladbrokes, your mum." Which, if you're of a juvenile persuasion, which, you know, Paddy Power is, that's a, you know, it's a really interesting, funny thing to tweet at them. Now, what we said, though, was that's all very well and done, but when you're trying to talk to the world about a much bigger, more important sort of social issue, you're probably not the best brand to be talking about homophobia. So we hooked them up with Stonewall. And that was really where the magic in all of this happened, because you had two very different characters talking about one issue, but in very different ways, and there was a kind of a cumulative effect that you'll see at the end. I have to say, it was also the most terrifying meeting I've ever organised in my life, because we had chart after chart of basically double entendres and sexual innuendos, and we were sort of terrified that these two people were going to sort of hate each other, but actually, fair play to them, they all really sort of embraced each other and got on well together. So I guess it starts with having a good sense of characters and personality, but you don't just need the good guys. Stories need some bad guys too. Sorry, where's this going? Oops, hold on. So our enemy was obviously homophobia, sort of generally, but there was some nice moments in the campaign where we could pick out some specific villains. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Westboro Baptist Church. Those of you who aren't, they're not great on gay rights. In fact, they're not great on human rights. In fact, they're not even great on human beings, basically. So we sort of thought we'd send them a nice little letter in the middle of the campaign. And I won't read all of this, but it began, "Dear hate-filled vermin, there is no hell, so we can't take any satisfaction in the eventual damnation of your souls. The only consolation is that your odious doctrine of hate is an inevitable road to defeat." And it continues in similar sort of vein. "The world will continue to turn, and your descendants will be blissfully unaware of the enmity you once peddled due to a misguided interpretation of God's will. And quite possibly, they'll be in a gay relationship, so suck on that." Anyway, nice and jaunty finish, we thought. Anyway, please find enclosed some rainbow laces. Should you decide to abandon your futile attempts before their inevitable demise, lots of love, the Rainbow Laces campaign, KISS. And it was the KISS that really did it for them as well. We got lots of complaints from them, but of course you get lots of other people sort of saying what a great thing. So you need some good guys and some bad guys. What you also need is, I suppose in Hollywood language, a simple quest, a challenge that people can get on with. And I think one of the problems with a lot of social media campaigns is that they ask people to do an awful lot, and they imagine that we've got more time on our hands than we actually do. So the great thing about Rainbow Laces was it was a really simple thing that everyone could do, whether you were a big Premiership star or whether you were sort of a grassroots player. So that helped too. But it wasn't all plain sailing. And in fact, one of the interesting things about the campaign was that when we started off, we didn't know how this whole thing was going to pan out. You know, we sent these laces off. We deliberately didn't tell any of the clubs that they were getting them, because we knew that they would just complain about it, and a lot of them actually did. So a lot of clubs kind of said they didn't have enough time to change their laces, and that just gave us some more ammunition to talk to them about how long does it actually take to change a pair of boot laces. And we had a lot of fun, people creating their own things on Twitter, showing people like Wayne Rooney how to tie his laces, which we thought was nice. So it only takes 2 minutes to change the game. So gradually things started to build up a head of steam, and of course celebrities, as you'd expect, was a big part of it as well, and you'll see how they added to the build of the campaign later on. But I think it's always important to kind of choose the right celebrity. So we always welcomed any celebrity support, but where we really hit the golden spot was to get people who are interested in football, but who are also potentially vocal about gay rights. The real sweet spot was the middle of that. So it's people like Matt Lucas or people like Stephen Fry, who obviously got a very strong interest in both camps. So Stephen's on the board of Norwich City, which sort of vaguely qualifies as football, kind of just about. So celebrity helped, and soon we were starting to build a lot of momentum. We got Arsenal on board in the second campaign. That made a huge difference. And the kind of towards the end of the story, I suppose what we had to try and then do was to build in some surprise. I think one of the problems with social media these days is that people have got such short attentions, so even a really cool story can get a bit boring after a little while. So we were always thinking of different ways to bring it to life. So hence, one of my proudest moments for a man of a certain age, as I am, was to get Roy the Rovers signed up, when we signed up the publishing rights with his publisher to say that he was on board as well. So that was a nice little moment. And eventually, we got lots of other people to join in. And I think if there was any sort of philosophy that guided our whole sort of approach, it was the idea, which again I think I'd really recommend to you, which came from our client at Paddy Power, which is to say, let's rather be a small part of something big than a big part of something small. So rather than kind of say, this is our campaign, this is the Paddy Power campaign, it's a big success, we threw our doors open to any brands that wanted to join in, and we got about 40 brands to either advertise with us formally, and we organised that through Metro, or just very happy for lots of people to show their support on Twitter that we didn't expect to happen. And that's the lovely thing about stories these days, leaving gaps and opportunities for other people to join in and tell your story for you and add up to something bigger. Which takes me, almost on time, to the happy ending that all stories have got to have. I think what this case study hopefully shows is that the lovely thing about Twitter is that it can bring all sorts of diverse communities together that you wouldn't expect otherwise normally to come together. So starting with Paddy Power.
I can't change, I look like Lewis Hamilton.
I can't change that my hair is perfecto.
Starting with Paddy Power, bringing in the likes of Amazon, creating a huge increase in the reach of those two brands together just because they've got such a strong social following in their own right. But then overlapping that with that, in a kind of unexpected way, you have the power of Stonewall, which brings a completely different community to the party. So what I loved about it was this, that Stonewall were very clear about this, that they would never reach the football audience would never reach the Stonewall audience, but together you had a really strong multiplicating effect on the audience, which I suppose goes back to the heart of what I said at the beginning. This is the great thing about Twitter, is that it potentially brings together all sorts of different communities in unexpected ways that would never have been possible before, and that together makes it a lovely place to be telling stories for good, and I'm sure you'll be seeing lots more examples of that over the course of today. So that's me. Thank you. Back to Zane now.